Savannah, Georgia, was a city where history lingered in the cracks of every brick wall, where Spanish moss draped over oak trees like veils hiding old secrets. Tourists came for the charm, but locals knew the city carried shadows darker than its sunlit square suggested. Among those shadows was the story of Evelyn Parker, a woman whose life was twisted into something unrecognizable by love, betrayal, and the justice system itself. On the surface, Evelyn was like any other Southern wife, gracious, polite, and a hostess who knew how to make iced tea just the right way. But beneath her smile lay years of quiet endurance, of biting her tongue when her husband, Richard Parker, spoke harshly. Their house on Whitaker Street looked like a postcard from the outside, but inside it was a place where Evelyn's voice was silenced and Richard's temper filled the air like a storm waiting to break. Richard was the kind of man people admired in public but whispered about in private. He ran a small but successful construction company and often boasted that he built dreams for Savannah families. He wore tailored suits when others showed up in jeans and had a laugh that made clients believe he was trustworthy. But Evelyn knew the laugh was just another mask. At home, he had no patience for her opinions, no kindness when she made mistakes, and no interest in her needs. He treated her like an accessory. A wife was good for business, for reputation, for image. Behind closed doors, Evelyn's life was a cycle of apologies and fears, of shrinking herself smaller and smaller so she wouldn't provoke his anger. The night Richard disappeared was one Savannah would not soon forget. It was late September, and a storm had rolled in from the coast, lashing against the windows with heavy rain. Neighbors recalled hearing raised voices from the Parker household, but arguments there weren't unusual. This time, though, the shouting stopped suddenly, replaced by an eerie silence that clung to the night. By morning, Richard was gone. His truck was found 2 days later, abandoned near the Savannah River, keys still in the ignition. Rumors spread quickly. Had he drowned? Had someone robbed him? Or had Evelyn finally snapped after years of humiliation? The police wasted no time turning their attention to Evelyn. She told them Richard had walked out after an argument and never returned, but her explanation only fueled their suspicions. "Mrs. Parker," Detective Harris Clayton said during interrogation, his tone firm but calm, "men don't just vanish without leaving a trace. You were the last person to see him alive. Help us understand what really happened." Evelyn clutched the edge of the metal table, her voice shaking as she repeated that she had no idea where her husband had gone. But the detective's eyes told her he didn't believe a word. The investigation dug into every corner of Evelyn's life. Police combed through her bank accounts, questioned her friends, and dissected her marriage in front of the world. The prosecution built a case out of fragments, the arguments neighbors overheard, Evelyn's internet searches on divorce lawyers, the life insurance policy Richard had taken out. Though no body was ever found, the picture painted in court was grim. Evelyn wasn't just a grieving wife. She was a jealous woman who had finally rid herself of her controlling husband. The courtroom was packed every day, reporters scribbling notes, the public fascinated by the beautiful woman accused of a crime so cold-blooded. Evelyn's lawyer tried to argue that there was no proof, no body, no weapon, no forensic evidence tying her to a crime. "You can't convict a woman for murder without a single shred of physical evidence," he said passionately. But the jury didn't see absence of evidence as innocence. They saw it as cunning. To them, Evelyn had hidden Richard's body too well, covered her tracks too carefully. The whispers in the gallery became louder. She was guilty. The day the verdict was read, Evelyn felt the world tilt beneath her. "We, the jury, find the defendant guilty of second-degree murder." The words echoed in her skull as her knees threatened to give out. Richard's family cheered, convinced justice had been served. Evelyn wanted to scream that she hadn't done it, that Richard was alive somewhere, but her voice wouldn't come. The judge's gavel fell, and with it, the life she had known was gone. Prison was nothing like Evelyn had imagined. The clang of metal doors closing behind her felt like the sound of a coffin lid sealing shut. She was given a number, a uniform, and stripped of everything else. Nights were the hardest, lying on a thin cot, listening to the sobs of other women, replaying every moment of her marriage. Some days she convinced herself Richard was truly dead and she was being punished for something she didn't even remember doing. Other days, she felt in her bones he was alive, laughing somewhere at her expense. That thought kept her awake, staring at the ceiling until dawn. Years passed in a haze of routine. Evelyn worked in the prison laundry, folding sheets until her fingers blistered. She learned to keep her head down, to avoid conflict, to survive. Some inmates took pity on her, believing her when she whispered, "I never killed him." Others mocked her, calling her the ghost widow. Still, her younger sister, Marianne, visited faithfully, always telling her to hold on. "Evie," she would say, pressing her palm against the glass between them, "I know you didn't do this. One day the truth will come out." Those words were Evelyn's only lifeline. After 12 years, Evelyn walked out of prison gates with a paper bag of belongings and the sun warming her face. The world had changed. Cell phones were smarter, cars sleeker, people more hurried, but she felt frozen in time. She moved into a small apartment in Atlanta, far from Savannah's whispers, and found work at a bakery. The smell of fresh bread comforted her in a way she hadn't expected. Each morning, she kneaded dough and told herself she was starting over. Yet, at night, the silence of her apartment pressed down on her, and the scars of her past throbbed like fresh wounds. It was a Tuesday evening when her new life shattered. Evelyn sat on her couch, scrolling through social media to pass the lonely hours, when a photo stopped her cold. A friend of a friend had posted vacation snapshots from Jacksonville, Florida. In the background of one picture, half hidden behind a crowd, was a man she knew better than anyone, Richard. He was older, heavier, with more gray in his hair, but it was him. His arm was wrapped around another woman, his smile wide, his eyes alive. Evelyn's phone slipped from her hands, clattering onto the floor. Her body trembled as she picked the phone back up, enlarging the photo until there was no doubt. It was Richard, the man she had been convicted of murdering, the man she had mourned and cursed and remembered for over a decade, was alive. Not only alive, thriving. He had built a new life, while hers had been destroyed. The rage that bubbled inside her was unlike anything she had ever felt. How dare he? How dare he let her rot in a cell, branded as a murderer, while he smiled for vacation photos? Sleep was impossible that night. Evelyn paced her apartment, her mind racing. Had he planned this all along? Had he staged his disappearance just to escape her? Or worse, had he set her up knowing she would be blamed? By morning, her hand shook so badly she could barely button her blouse. She couldn't function, couldn't breathe, not knowing he was out there. She hired a private investigator, Calvin Brooks, a grizzled man with sharp eyes who promised to find answers. "If your husband's alive," he said, "I'll prove it." Within weeks, Calvin returned with a folder thick with photos and documents. Richard was living under the name Rick Palmer in Jacksonville. He owned a small boat repair business and lived with a woman named Diane Miller. There were photos of them at grocery stores, walking on the beach, dining at restaurants. Richard looked content, even happy. Evelyn's hands clenched into fists as she studied the evidence. "So it's true," she whispered. Calvin's eyes softened. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Looks like he faked his disappearance. You were convicted of a crime that never happened." The betrayal hit Evelyn like a tidal wave. All those years lost. Her youth, her freedom, her reputation, all stolen by Richard's selfishness. She thought of the nights she had cried herself to sleep on a prison cot, the humiliation of strip searches, the loneliness of holidays without family. And all the while he had been building a new life, free and smiling. "He framed me," she said through gritted teeth. "He let me take the fall." Calvin hesitated. "I can't prove my intent." But yes, he walked away, knowing what it would cost you. Evelyn's world narrowed to a single point: revenge. She couldn't eat, couldn't focus at work. She drove down to Jacksonville one weekend, parking across the street from Richard's house. She watched him laugh on the porch with Diane, their hands brushing as they shared a glass of wine. The sight was unbearable. Memories of prison flashed before her eyes. Cold showers, taunts from guards, the endless clang of doors. Each memory was a knife twisting deeper into her chest. Richard had stolen her life, and now he dared to live as though she never existed. Evelyn's obsession with Richard consumed her every thought. She stopped eating properly, barely slept, and found herself driving aimlessly through Jacksonville streets just to be near his neighborhood. She sat in her car for hours, watching him laugh with Diane as if the past had been erased. Every sound of his laughter was a reminder of her lost years. Prison had taken her 20s and 30s, left her scarred and hollow, while he had enjoyed freedom, love, and joy. The injustice of it was unbearable. Each passing day tightened the knot of fury inside her chest until it felt like she was suffocating. She began to rationalize what she felt she had to do. "It's not just about revenge," she told herself late at night, pacing her tiny apartment. "It's about justice. No one else will ever understand what he did to me. But I know. He stole my life. He made me a prisoner before I ever went to prison." She replayed the trial in her mind. The jury's judgmental stares, the prosecutor's cold voice, the gavel sealing her fate. All because Richard had staged his disappearance. He had set her up to take the fall, and she had. The more she thought about it, the more she believed there was only one way to close the wound he had left in her life. One humid evening, Evelyn returned to Jacksonville armed with resolve. She had bought a gun from a man who sold it out of the back of his truck, no questions asked. She carried it in her purse, feeling the weight of it like a secret heartbeat. She waited until Diane's car pulled away from the driveway, her nurse's uniform visible in the window as she left for a night shift. The porch light flickered on, and Richard stepped outside with a cigarette, just as he always did. Evelyn's hands trembled as she stepped out of the shadows, her face half lit by the street lamp. Richard froze when he saw her. "Evelyn." His voice cracked in disbelief, cigarette falling from his lips. "My God, you're alive." His words dripped with irony, as if he had forgotten she was the one who had been branded a murderer while he played dead. Evelyn's voice shook, but it carried years of fury. "You let me rot in prison," she hissed. "You let the world call me a killer, while you built a new life with her. Do you have any idea what you did to me?" Richard raised his hands, eyes darting nervously toward the street as if someone might save him. "Evie, listen to me. Things got complicated. I had to leave. I didn't think they'd convict you. I thought—" He stopped, searching for words, but Evelyn's glare silenced him. She felt the tears burning her eyes. "You thought what? That I'd just carry your death on my shoulders forever? That I'd be forgotten while you lived happily ever after?" Her voice cracked, half rage, half grief. Her hand went into her purse, fingers curling around the cold metal. The gun felt heavier than she remembered, as though it carried the weight of every year she had lost. Richard stepped back, palms still raised. "Please, Evelyn, we can talk about this. I'll make it right. I'll tell the world the truth. Just don't do this." His words came too late. The storm inside Evelyn had broken open, and there was no stopping it now. The first shot rang out, echoing down the quiet suburban street. Richard staggered, clutching his chest, his face contorted in shock. Evelyn fired again, then again, each shot ripping through the years of silence and pain. Richard crumpled onto the wooden porch, blood spreading beneath him like a dark halo. For a moment, the world seemed to freeze. Evelyn stood there, chest heaving, the gun trembling in her hands, staring at the man who had destroyed her life. Diane's scream shattered the night. She had returned briefly, having forgotten something inside. The sound cut through Evelyn's trance, sharp and panicked. Neighbors' lights flicked on, voices rising in alarm. Evelyn didn't run. She dropped the gun, her hands raised, eyes fixed on Richard's lifeless body. For the first time in years, she felt an awful, hollow calm. The nightmare was over, though the cost was unimaginable. Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder by the second. Evelyn sank onto the porch steps, not resisting when the officers arrived and shouted commands. "Drop the weapon. Hands behind your head." She obeyed, whispering, "I already did." They cuffed her wrists, the cold steel biting into her skin, and led her toward the flashing lights. As they pushed her into the back of the patrol car, she said softly, "I killed him. I killed Richard Parker." The officers exchanged baffled glances. One muttered under his breath, "Didn't she already serve time for that?" The bizarre irony of the situation would soon make national headlines, but in that moment, Evelyn felt nothing. No fear, no triumph, only the crushing emptiness of someone who had lost everything twice. She rested her head against the cool glass of the patrol car, staring out at the house where her life had unraveled for the final time. Her trial drew crowds larger than the first. Reporters swarmed the courthouse steps, shouting questions. "Is it true you were convicted of killing him before? Do you feel justified in what you did?" Evelyn walked past them silently, shackles clinking, her face unreadable. Inside the courtroom, her new attorney argued fiercely. "Your Honor, my client spent 12 years in prison for a murder that never happened. She was betrayed by the justice system and by her husband's cruel deception. Her actions, though tragic, were born of trauma and unbearable injustice. But the prosecution saw only the facts. The defendant shot Richard Parker multiple times," they said coldly. "She came to his home with a weapon, waited until he was alone, and executed him. Her past conviction is irrelevant to this crime. The law does not excuse murder, no matter the circumstances." The jury listened, their faces grim, as Evelyn sat motionless at the defense table. She no longer cried, no longer pleaded. She simply stared ahead, hollowed out by years of pain. Marianne sat in the gallery, tears streaming down her face. She had fought for Evelyn's freedom once before, writing letters, visiting, praying. But this time, she knew there was no saving her sister. Evelyn had crossed a line that could never be undone. She whispered a prayer under her breath, begging God to have mercy on Evelyn's soul. The jury deliberated for hours, wrestling with the extraordinary case. Some sympathized with Evelyn, seeing her as a victim pushed too far. Others saw only the violence of her actions. When they returned, the courtroom fell silent. "We, the jury, find the defendant guilty of first-degree murder." Evelyn didn't flinch. She had expected nothing less. The judge sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The gavel struck, final and unyielding, and Evelyn felt the last sliver of her freedom slip away. As the guards let her out, she glanced back at Marianne, who mouthed through her tears, "I love you." Evelyn nodded faintly, her lips trembling, but said nothing. Back in a cell, the walls pressing in once more, Evelyn finally understood the cruel symmetry of her life. She had been punished for a crime she didn't commit, then punished again for one she did. Richard had haunted her twice, first as a ghost who wasn't dead, then as a corpse she created. In the end, the bars were familiar, almost expected. Evelyn sat on her cot, staring into the dim light, and whispered to herself, "Some prisons are made of bars, and some are made of memories, but both last forever." Thanks for watching.